So last week we began a question and answer study on relationships, courtship and marriage. We got through a few questions, but not very many. And if it's okay with everybody, I'm just going to carry on with those questions just in the order that I have them. I don't know whose questions they are, so I'm hoping that people's questions do get answered. I think part of the problem is some people have asked multiple questions. So I think one person may have asked 4 or 5 questions. So sometimes it gets takes a bit longer to go through all of them. So I'll try my best. Question: will there always be a time to get married for those who are still seeking for a partner, even in Panium and the Sunday law period? So I guess the reason why people ask this question is because as priests we tend to think things are closing up, if I can say this, prematurely, actually before Ellen White would indicate that things are closing up. I'm assuming people have this whole idea about there comes a time where it's not appropriate to marry from some kind of reasoning that they either get from inspiration, the Bible, or from Ellen White, which is why I think people would say Panium. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page on this issue. If this were a line that Ellen White would give us, and this were the close of probation, and this were the Sunday law, this would be 1141, and this would be Daniel 12:1, then we're living in this dispensation today. This would be the latter rain, and we would argue that we're living in the former rain. And whilst we're here in this place, then according to inspiration, just at that simple level, there's nothing to indicate that we shouldn't marry in this period before the close of probation and before the latter rain. So that's part one of the question. I think the reason why people become fixated about this issue of marriage in the time period in which we're living is because they take the line of the priests, and I think they expand upon it to so much depth that they become fearful of what they can and cannot do. So according to Ellen White, we're still in the period of the former rain, according to inspiration. And so according to that understanding, there should really be no reason for us to not marry. And then we would come to the Sunday law period, the rights and wrongs of marrying then. And I think people would have, I'm going to assume, differing views of the rights and wrongs of marriage during that time period, whether or not they think it would be acceptable or unacceptable to marry. So I guess I want to ask if someone wants to say something about the Sunday law period, why they would think it's inappropriate to marry during that time period. What reason would someone give? I'm just waiting to see if someone's got a hand up.
Maybe there'll be persecution.
So people Brother Leon said there's persecution that's going to happen then, and that might be a reason why people would not marry during that time period. Brother Curtis.
Perhaps someone could reason that it's a distraction from the work that needs to be done at that time. So because counsel would be that a man and a wife, when you join together, take some time outside of extensive ministry to get to know each other once they're married. That would detract them from the mission of sharing the gospel. I don't know, not my views, but that could be something that someone brings up.
So the argument that you've just mentioned is that people would say in that time period it would be a distraction, and that would be a reason why people wouldn't marry. I know this has been an issue for many people, even before we understood that this time period was Jacob's time of trouble for God's people, for the priests. I know going back 10, 20 years, people would talk about it's a distraction to be married. So I think we're always going to be embroiled in that issue that people will say it's a distraction to marry. It's always going to be a distraction to marry. So the question is this distraction, as people would frame it, does that make it inappropriate for people to marry in that time period? Is that a period where we should not be distracted? Now I've put 3 Bible references on the board there. Then if we can all see them, they're all the same passage taken from Matthew, Mark and Luke. If you were to read them, they'll read pretty much the same. I'll read the Matthew version. It says, "And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days." So I'm assuming most people are aware of what this is referring to. This is referring to the destruction of Jerusalem, and when you see, it says, if you go back to verse 15, Matthew 24:15, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whosoever readeth, let him understand. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains." If you're in the housetop, let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, but to flee. If you're in the field, don't look back. And if you're with child, you need to flee. It says, "To them that give suck in those days, there's a woe to them, because of the trouble that's coming upon them." And it talks about when your flight should be. All 3 Gospels speak about it in a similar fashion. So Matthew and Mark basically say the same thing, that this abomination of desolation that's spoken of by Daniel. And in Luke 21:20, it says, "And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh." So I don't know how people view these passages. So I've got 2 hands up. Brother Tom?
Yeah, just in addition to those passages, there's also a quote. I mean, I don't know if I'm just complicating things. But Ellen White has a quote where she says, basically like, in these days, the fewer marriages we have, the better, or something like that. I remember that was something that at least had brought to my attention as well. Just given reasons as to why, we might think there comes a time where you wouldn't have more marriages.
So I'll just read that passage. It's taken. It's found in a few places, but we'll just read it from Adventist Home. Adventist Home, page 115, paragraph 3. It says, the question is often asked, shall a wife have no will of her own? The Bible plainly states that the husband is the head of the family. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands. If this injunction ended here, we might say that the position of the wife is not an enviable one. It's a very hard and trying position in very many cases, and it would be better were there fewer marriages. Many husbands stop at the words, wives, submit yourselves, but we read the conclusion of the same injunction, which is as it is fit in the Lord. So that's one passage where she says that there's fewer marriages.
5T.
Sorry?
5T 366.
Okay, so the three that I found was all dealing with this same subject about the inequality in marriage, which is why it's wrong. And Sister Emma has found another series of quotes.
Should have got it with fewer marriages. 5T 366.1.
Oh, I didn't catch it. I just put fewer marriages.
So did I. Straight.
Okay, so I'll go to... you put fewer the marriages.
I wasn't afraid to
yeah.
fewer marriages in 2 years.
So this is 5T 366.
Time to show.
So the ones I found were all sexist quotes. In this age of the world, as the scenes of Earth's history are soon to close, and we are about to enter upon the time of trouble, such as never was, the fewer the marriages contracted, the better for all, both men and women. Above all, when Satan is working with all deceivableness or unrighteousness in them that perish, let Christians beware of connecting themselves with unbelievers. God has spoken. All who fear him will submit to his wise injunctions. Our feelings, impulses, and affections must flow heavenward, not earthward, not in the low base channel of sensual thought and indulgence. It is time now that every soul should stand as in the sight of a heart-searching God. So, I don't know if anybody's looked up the quote. I don't know if you want to comment, Brother Tom, on this quote and how you actually understand what it means.
To be honest, I haven't read it in like years. I think it was just coming back to my mind when you asked what people would think that there's coming a time where it'd be better not to get married. Mm-hmm. And she speaks there about well, as I'm reading it, as read it now, it talks about as we approach the time of trouble, and so this might be a different kind of dispensation to where we are. But the question is still asked: so is it then at that point? Is there going to be a point basically where it's like it's not good to get married, for example, after the close of probation?
Sure. If we take Ellen White's statement as is, we are living in that dispensation. I would argue, if that's a Sunday law, and this was 1844, this is the dispensation in which Ellen White has written this statement. So this would be 5T 366, and this would be the time of trouble. She says we're living in this dispensation and we're approaching the time of trouble, and we're in the same dispensation that Ellen White's writing about. If we were to take her way of approaching the subject, you have 1844 to the Sunday law, latter rain, or Sunday law period, then Jacob's time of trouble. So I think we're in the same dispensation that Ellen White's referring to, as we're approaching. In this age of the world, as the scenes of Earth's history are soon to close, so you would argue that would be either the close of probation or the second advent, as we are about to enter into the time of trouble such as never was. So that would be here, Daniel 12:1. So it's the close of probation. As we're about to enter the close of probation, she says, the fewer the marriages contracted, the better for all, both men and women. And then she says why. So I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts of why she's saying this. What is the issue that's at hand? Sistrum?
She's warning about Christians joining to unbelievers. Is it because they'll be unequally yoked? So I'm not sure why.
Perhaps this is a warning that this would be a tool used by Satan to distract believers. As Sister Emma said, people who venture to marry unbelievers, it could be a tool that Satan uses in these closing scenes.
I don't know if everyone is okay with that explanation, but this statement is found in 5 Testimonies and also 13 MR. Oh, sorry, not 13 MR. Testimony Treasures Volume 2. And in both stories, or both books, it's actually, the subject is dealing with marrying unbelievers and the risks that are involved in that endeavour. It's not actually talking about two committed people who are contemplating marriage. It's talking about the risks of marrying someone who's not a believer. At the bottom of this paragraph, so I'll read it again. The fewer the marriages contracted, the better for all, both men and women. Above all, when Satan is working with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, let Christians beware of contracting themselves with unbelievers. God has spoken. All who fear him will submit to his wise injunctions. Our feelings, impulses and affections must flow heavenward, not earthward, not in the low, base channel of sensual thought and indulgence. It is now time that every soul should stand as in the sight of a heart-searching God. Now, I haven't taken the opportunity to read through the whole of this passage in context, but I want to make a suggestion. In the time period in which Ellen White's writing, obviously she lives in the United States, and what would we call the United States? What epitaph do we give to the United States? Maybe people don't know what I'm referring to when I say that. Anybody?
Glorious land.
Separate to the glorious land. That's a good answer. I've addressed this issue in the past. I think I addressed it when we first started doing some of our Q&As here, but certainly in other presentations. So I would suggest the answer that I was looking for was Protestant America. That essentially Ellen White does not live in a secular society. She lives in a Christian society. Wherever you turn, basically people are Christians. Now they may be lapsed Christians, there may be people who claim to be deists or atheists, but essentially people are Protestants, they're Christians. Just like in the UK, maybe not today, but in years gone by, people would be Anglican, people would be part of the Church of England almost by birth. And she lives in a very similar society. So when Adventists are in that society, the only thing that makes them different to the rest of society is not that they believe in Jesus, it's the peculiar doctrines or beliefs of being Adventist, whether it's the health reform, whether it's the Sabbath, or whether it's the issue of our prophetic understanding of end-time events. So we have peculiar Christian views. But separate to that, essentially Adventists are Christians. So in her dispensation, in the time period in which she lives, it's very easy for her to think that, not her, the people who live in her generation, that as long as you marry a Christian, you're basically okay. And she's trying to say that really isn't the case. And I would suggest these unbelievers that she's referring to are not the complete worldly people that we might imagine them to be. Now, that would be included in that class, but there are sufficient numbers of people who we might today call nominal Christians, but in her day and age, they would just be regular Christians. You're just born into the faith. The point that she makes here at the end, she says, our feelings, impulses and affections must flow heavenwards, not earthwards. So she's really fundamentally speaking about the fact that we should not be married to people who don't have the same perspective of the great controversy that we have. That these people are more interested in what's going on the earth than they are about what's going on in heaven. So this is a quote that people use often to discourage people from marrying, and hopefully we can see, even without going into other paragraphs before or after going to the introduction, the conclusion of this small passage here, I'm hoping that we can all see that the marriages that she's referring to are these marriages that are basically contracted on a false basis, on a false premise. It's a premise that's built upon sensuality or feelings and affections. It's not based upon the principle of two people coming together to glorify God in their marriage. So I don't know if anybody has a comment on that. Okay, so I'm assuming all of us are in agreement that the premise of this is not that two believing Christians cannot marry, but the context is that we should not entangle ourselves with marriages that are built upon the wrong premise or the wrong basis. Now, we just read from 5T, and it's chapter 42. It says marriage with unbelievers. If we were to go to Testimony Treasures, volume 2, and the code for that is 2TT, it's exactly the same quote. And the only reason I mention this one is in this quote, it's the same chapter title, Marriage with Unbelievers, but if you go to the subheading, I'm not sure if we can all go back there. It's page 122, paragraph 4. By the way, the passage from 5TT here, this is a letter. If you go back to page 361, it's a letter to someone called Sister L. And if we go back to this, I'm just going to read the first part of this. This is the opening paragraph of this section, chapter 42, Marriage with Unbelievers. Dear Sister L, I have learned of your contemplated marriage with one who is not united with you in religious faith, and I fear that you have not carefully weighed this important matter. Before taking a step which is to exert an influence upon all your future life, I urge you to give the subject careful and prayerful deliberation. Will this new relationship prove a source of true happiness? Will it be a help to you in the Christian life? Will it be pleasing to God? Will your example be a safe one for others to follow? So she explains about the problem with this marriage, and that was page 361, and we read the quote from page 366, where she talks about the fewer the marriages contracted, because most of those marriages that are being contracted are not marriages that are in agreement with God. And if you go to Testimony Treasures, volume 2, the subsection of this one is called as the days of Noah. So this is page 122.4. That's not where the quote is taken, that's the beginning of this section. It says, the spirit of intense worldliness that now exists The disposition to acknowledge no higher claim than that of self-gratification constitutes one of the signs of the last days. As it was in the days of Noah, said Christ, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives. They were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. The people of this generation are married and given in marriage with the same reckless disregard of God's requirements as was manifested in the days of Noah. There is in the Christian world an astonishing, alarming indifference to the teaching of God's word in regard to the marriage of Christians with unbelievers. Many who profess to love and fear God choose to follow the bent of their own minds rather than take counsel of infinite wisdom. And that's the context of this discussion about this fewer marriages. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments to make? Who was that?
Oh, sorry. I didn't realise my mic was on.
Oh.
I was just clearing my throat.
Okay, I thought that was
I
like
guess I do have
a grunt or something like yes. Or go ahead.
Right. I do have a thought. It was in regards to the previous passage that was in. I think it was 5 testimonies. The opening paragraph that you read there, where she addresses Sister L, the language that she uses is quite interesting because she's not necessarily saying that you should not do this or you should not do that, but she opens up the whole passage with questions that almost allows her to come to the conclusions for herself. And therefore, I think what Ellen White is doing here is giving her the choice to make those conclusions based upon information that she will lay out. If that makes sense.
Yes.
I'm also picking up on the style of counselling that she's using as opposed to anything.
Okay, that's a good point. I think often when I've spoken with people with respect to counselling or directing them, people often want a yes or no answer whether or not they should or if they shouldn't do something. Now, there are sometimes, some occasions where Ellen White will tell you directly you shouldn't do this or you should do that, but often she will ask questions that you should be asking yourself. And I think even though you may not have quite said it this way, if I understood the intention of what you meant, that this is a much better way of approaching counselling, whether it's counsel on courtship or any other subject, is to try to ask questions of people that they should be asking themselves. And I think that's a better way of approaching a subject rather than just telling people no or yes for any particular reason that the counsellor may or may not give. If you can ask the appropriate questions for people to think about for themselves, then they're free to make the choice by themselves. Hopefully that's a fair summary of the point that Brother Rayan was trying to make. Brother Curtis.
Just on the point that Brother Rayan was making, is there a particular reason why Ellen White does what she does in this case, but in other cases on the same topic, she'll be quite explicit? So I'll give an example. In other passages, she says Christians are forbidden to marry unbelievers, as opposed to how she's approached it now. Is there a reason why she does that?
So I'm sure there is a reason. There must be one. I don't know if that passage that you're reading, is that a letter to somebody or is that a general statement?
I can't, and I don't have the quote in front of me.
Oh, okay.
It just comes to mind.
Okay, I thought you were reading something specific. Often when she's writing, if you're able to, often when she's writing to somebody, her language is much more personal, and I think sometimes the way she will approach a subject can be different than if she writes or says a generic statement about a particular topic or about a particular issue. So I don't know if that's the reason, and if it goes beyond that, I think it's because of this particular situation that she must know something about this sister and her situation, that she would be more circumspect in her language.
So I found it. I don't know where the original base is, but this is just a compilation. CCH 121.1.
CCH
121.1.
Counsels for the Church, chapter 19. Never should God's people venture upon forbidden ground. Marriage between believers and unbelievers is forbidden by God. But too often the unconverted heart follows its own desires, and marriages unsanctioned by God are formed.
She does say something similar in the paragraph Q5T just before. God's sanction is not given to you.
Is this counsel to an individual person, or is this just general like outlines? I thought there's a difference between when she's speaking to someone personally and when she's kind of giving principles.
As far as I can see, this was from a Review and Herald article in 1906. I don't think it's a personal letter. I think it's just a general injunction to people. Sister Emma said that there's a similar statement in the 5T. What was that?
Yeah, it just says it in the paragraph before.
Which chapter?
366, 365, paragraph 3.3, sorry. About 4 lines up from the bottom of it. God's sanction is not given to unions which he has expressly forbidden.
So this is page 365, paragraph 3. It's the same one that we've got here from 5T. And it says, God's sanction is not given to unions which he has expressly forbidden. For years I have been receiving letters from different persons who have formed unhappy marriages, and the revolting histories opened before me are enough to make the heart ache. It is no easy thing to decide what advice can be given to these unfortunate ones, nor how their hard lot can be lightened, but their sad experience should be a warning to others. So she does use quite strong language here, but it is a letter, and I think the other ones that we just read a moment ago is a generic statement. I don't think it's a particular letter to someone. I think it's a Review and Herald article, from what I can ascertain. So I'm going to move on, and the question says, and what about the Sunday law period? Is it too late to marry during the Sunday law period? Which is here. And even though that's not the time of trouble, I can't remember when we discussed this, if it was, I don't think last week, I think it probably was the week before. Even though Ellen White doesn't use this phrase, in the compilations that we have, in Last Day Events in particular, this is called the little time of trouble. And it's the time of trouble that precedes Jacob's time of trouble, or the great time of trouble, such as never was, that we find in Daniel 12:1. So in this time period, the question that's being asked is it okay to marry then? And I think the answer to that is, I don't know what the situation is going to be like in the world, but it's going to be a lot more normal than we think. I think all this idea that we've got a very short time period then where everything is in mayhem, I'm not sure how accurate that is to what it will be like at that time period. To initiate a relationship in this time period could be problematic, but I think I would like to answer just in a simple way the question asked, will there always be a time to get married for those who are still seeking for a partner? And my simple answer is yes, I think it's okay to marry at any time. The longer you leave it, the more problematic it gets. If you're going to follow the rules and principles that we're given, if you were to choose a partner somewhere here in 12.1, whether or not you could actually feasibly marry with confidence is open to question. But are we forbidden from marrying? I would suggest no, we're not. The quotes that I gave here from Matthew, Mark and Luke don't speak about marriage. They speak about those with young children. And it says that those people with young children, those who give suck, who are not weaned yet, we're in this time period here in the Sunday law, it does say that these people will find difficulty in some shape or form. Now, when we may have held these conventional views about the Sunday Sabbath issue, with all of that imagery that most of us have been brought up with, we might be able to relate to why it would be difficult. Obviously in the literal it's clear why those people who are giving suck are going to struggle here, because it's in this time period that they need to flee and run away into the mountains. But knowing what we do know currently, how we make a spiritual application of this counsel, I'm not fully persuaded. It doesn't talk about marriage, it talks about those who have young children. So I think most of us who either have young children or know people who do have young children, I'm pretty sure that most of us, even today, realise how difficult it is to bring up children with all that's going on in the world, all that they see, all the access to the world that they have. It's very difficult to protect them from the ravages of the world. So the only thing that I could see in Scripture is about marriage here is that those who have young ones will place themselves in difficulties. The ones that we read here from Ellen White that speak about marriage speak really about those who are going to marry unbelievers. Sister Daisy.
Yeah, if you could, are you able to clarify the point about children, just so it's out there as well, please?
Sure. I just read the passage. You go ahead.
No, as in, like, I think many people would agree about troublous times, Sunday law period onwards, but I think even from early on in the movement, as far back as the early 2000s, it was always kind of not said directly that we should be having children. So I just wanted to ask that in relation to that question.
So if we were to take perhaps one of the strongest statements about having children in inspiration, I would suggest it's one of these ones. And if this is the strongest statement that people can find, if this is one of the strongest statements that people can find, you can see that this statement doesn't say not to have children. It does not say that it's a sin to have children. I think what we must remember is if you go back to the original setting, that this waymark that's been spoken about in these passages, Matthew, Mark and Luke, is AD 66, leading up to AD 70. Now if you go back into the history, it's easy to demonstrate that the disciples, those Christians who were alive in that history, can see this event coming up. We would call the history just before that, if I were to just to mark some history preceding the Sunday law, here, in Ellen White's language, this would be called the agitation of the Sunday law. We see the subject being agitated. And when you see the agitation, it's chapter 38 of Great Controversy. If you were to go back into this dispensation, the dispensation in Christ's line, the disciples, then there would have been an agitation of issues in society that would indicate that AD 66, or this event, the army surrounding Jerusalem, is approaching. So it doesn't come as a sudden surprise. The event itself, the day that they arrive, may have been a surprise. They may not have anticipated it was going to happen that day. But the event itself, they can see it coming. So those people who are having children or who are marrying, it's not that they're unaware of the times in which they live. And if this is the strongest statement that we have that deals with the subject of having children, to a group of people who have been warned about what's going to happen, and Christ tells them that if you have children in this time period, you will be distressed by that. Those disciples who are having children in this time period just before, they're pretty sure about the time in which they live, and they're still having children. Now, Sister Daisy asked about, I think she said from around the year 2000, people in this movement in particular, maybe conservative Adventists in general, have complained about people having children. So I would suggest that often most of those objections to having children are based upon people's personal experience, either that they've had children themselves and their difficulties, or they've observed people who have had children and they have seen that they have had a hard time with it. So if we just stick to what inspiration teaches, it doesn't forbid us from having children. And I didn't think it would be appropriate for me to go any further than inspiration teaches. All it says is that it's going to be difficult for those who give suck in those days. In the literal history, it's clear why that would be the case. In our history, whatever the difficulties that are confronting parents at that time period, I guess we're yet to find out, although we can already see what the issues are. It's extremely difficult to raise children in the 21st century, in the period in which we live. The question asks, is there any period when we shouldn't get married? And I'm going to say I don't think there is a period where we're forbidden to marry. Sister Sophie.
We're just going back to that one, really, just about the children. So I've always had it on my heart that I always wanted to adopt, because there's loads of children out there who, just because I don't have a biological child myself, doesn't mean I can't be a blessing to like other children. But for couples who are getting married or are newly married during that time where it is going to be, troublesome to raise a child, I don't believe that in sexless marriages. I think that sex is a gift from God. But if you're not then wanting to have children, is contraception encouraged? Or let's say you want to have children, is adoption encouraged?
So if you're asking me personally, often when questions come up, we kind of always speak on this movement level perspective, and yet people have their own opinions, and they often want to ask my opinion on subjects. So when we speak about encouraging, I don't know if I'd want to encourage any one of those three options. I think I don't want to encourage contraception, I don't want to encourage children, and I don't want to encourage adoption. What I would prefer to do is take the point that Brother Rayon made, which is ask people pertinent and hopefully relevant questions to their own situation, and for them to come to the answers themselves about what they think is best for themselves. I think individuals are the ones that are qualified to make that decision for themselves, and if they feel that they're not, I think they should be encouraged in the sense of being educated to think for themselves, to make decisions for themselves. So if we just take it as a principle, is there anything wrong in principle with adopting? No, there isn't. It's a very good endeavour. It's a very good choice for people to make. Today, I'm not going to field any more questions on this issue, but today we live in a privileged age, if I can call it that, or an enlightened age, maybe that's a better way of saying it, that the government recognises that single people, people who have never been married, can adopt. I think single people can become not only viable but actually very good parents. So that's point one. Point two, should we be encouraging people to have children or not have children? And I wouldn't want to do either of those things. I think people should be encouraged to make their own decisions about that subject. One thing I would counsel people on, and I do, who are contemplating marriage or are just newlywed, is that they don't have children too early on in their marriage. I think having children introduced into a marriage at the very beginning, in most cases, is not helpful. It makes their marriage or the union that they're trying to develop, the man and the woman, difficult. And then the third one, I'm doing them in reverse order, contraception. There's no principled reason, as far as I know, for us not to use contraception. Each couple needs to decide for themselves what type of contraception they're willing or prepared to use, based upon, I'm hoping, common sense as opposed to some kind of religious ideology, because I don't think there particularly is a religious ideology that says contraception is wrong. So I think for many couples, whether they're going to use contraception as a proactive choice so that they don't have children, I think that is an acceptable and a good option. If couples want to have children, I think they should consider their own circumstances in being able to take care of those children, and there are many factors to that. One of them, the one that I just mentioned, was how long they've been married and how strong is their relationship. And then the third one, is adoption okay? And I think Ellen White gives a lot of counsel for adopting. In fact, in some passages she speaks about the preference to adopt than to have your own children. I think practically that is good counsel, but there are people, either men or women, that actually want to have their own children. The urge, the drive to have their own child is so overwhelming that the idea of adopting just doesn't sit well with them. And I don't think it would be right for me to say, should we direct or counsel, or is there a preferred option to those three? I don't know if you want to come back, Sister Sophie, with any thoughts.
No, amen. I'm in the same alignment as well, because I just sometimes think about the old conservative mindset. It is that all or nothing approach. Whereas, like, you've either just got to abstain, and I just don't believe in that. If you're married, I think it should be a blessing to come together, or there's the option of you can't have contraception. I think this is a balanced way to view it. And like I said, I think science has come a long way, and to give couples that freedom to choose what's right for them in their marriage is exactly what I believe is right as well. So, no, that's perfect.
Great. So just one point. Ellen White speaks about in a general way of not having large families, and the caution that she gives is because parents are not able to take care of the many children that they tended to have in her day and age. And if she's going to say we shouldn't have large families because they can't be taken care of properly, both financially, the health of the children tend to suffer. She speaks at some length about the health of the wife and how draining it is on the wife, on the woman's body when she has baby after baby. It actually does wear away at you. For those sisters who have had children, they will know that. Husbands will be aware of it, at least they should be. If you've had lots of children, you should be able to see that in your wife. And so the question is, if she says don't have large families, is she advocating abstinence from sex? And I would argue that she's not doing that at all. I think what she would have with what people would have been doing in her day and age would be basically natural contraception. It comes under different titles, you know, the rhythm method, whatever system they would have chosen to use, and they were pretty well understood in those day and ages. Even if it was perhaps more hit and miss than it is today, they would have chosen some kind of natural form of contraception. And I think, even though she doesn't mention it, that's what people would be doing, rather than abstaining from having intimacy. I don't think that's what she's advocating. So if we took her writing at face value and basing it upon the premise that she's not saying that people should not have intimacy, then it leads you to a place where she is advocating contraception. Now, in her day and age, they just didn't have the equipment, if I can say it that way, whether it's the pill or whether it's condoms or other types of contraception that women use. They didn't have those things available to them, so they would have had to resort to other more crude means. But I don't see anywhere that she's advocating that people keep on having babies because they can't help it, or they don't have intimacy because the natural result is babies. I think people were more clued up to their own bodies than that, even in the Victorian age. So I'm going to go on to the next question. What can those do that desire marriage during this pandemic? And the reason the question is asked is because people can't physically meet. It seems the pandemic has slowed down the process of finding someone. So I guess the answer to that is yes, it slowed down so many things. If you're in a relationship, it slowed down your ability to either marry if you're at that stage in your relationship. I know of a few people in the movement who were about to be married, and it's prevented that. It slowed down courtship because people can't meet as often. And if you haven't even begun the process, it's very difficult, virtually impossible of course, to actually meet anybody to start a relationship. And so the question is, what can we do about it? To me, I don't know. I don't think there's anything that we can do. So I guess my response to that is I don't think there's much that can be done, really, to to help anybody in that way. Is this right?
I'm saying you wait. You can wait.
Yeah, basically
Or
you have
online, obviously.
you have to wait. So the problem is this pandemic just going to disappear, work its way through the world, and we're not going to be confronted with something else, or are we going to be, or is this the beginning of something that we need to get more used to? It's hard to tell. I have no idea the answer to that question, but what can those people do? I think there's not much that we can do. Even those people who are in a relationship, it's very difficult, especially if you people that lived in different parts, not only of the country, but particularly in different parts of the world. It becomes very difficult to navigate your way through this. Can a priest marry a Levite when they join our kingdom? Sister Daisy, before we go into number 3. Go ahead.
So just a quick question
Sure.
about the global pandemic and marriage and courtship. Sorry, this may sound silly, but hear me out. So can someone like get married legally and leave there? Like just go to a court wedding and just leave it there?
Okay, so the question is, can we have a registry wedding without a religious wedding? Is that the question?
Yeah, something like that.
So I've been asked that question before, actually, and I've chosen to not answer that question because I'm not sure if there's clarity amongst us what it means to have a religious wedding. But let me say the following. If a person desired to have what we would normally call a religious wedding, besides all the ceremony and all, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, all the paraphernalia that goes around that, what most people actually want in a religious wedding is God's blessing, which is why you would do it in a church, why you would have a minister or an elder perform the ceremony. It would have a religious feel, a religious connotation, because we would want God to be involved in the solemnity of that moment to get his blessing. And if that's the case, then if we can arrange, if someone's situation allows them to arrange to have a registry wedding, that the state would allow that with either just a couple or with a few people, then I think it would be feasible for that couple to actually have someone join them together and to pray over them to seek the Lord's blessing, which is what I think the essence of, if we just use the phrase or the term that a religious wedding is all about, is to seek the Lord's blessing. Now all the rest that's involved with a religious wedding, the whole ceremony, the church setting, all of that could then be postponed for another time if a couple decided to do that. Essentially what then would happen would be just the ceremony of the wedding and with a reception, or depending on how the marriage was performed in the first place, if it was a small wedding, then a couple could just decide to have a reception and not even have what we would normally call a religious wedding. So if someone was able to do a registry wedding, then I think that they should be able to manage to have a religious wedding, a religious ceremony with a few people. It could easily happen on the same day. All they would need to have is someone that would be willing to perform that marriage ceremony, and it could be as simple as someone just offering a prayer, a dedicatory prayer for the couple. So I think if we think about marriage, religious marriage, in terms of someone offering a prayer on behalf of the couple, and invoking God's blessing, I think that could be done at the same time, so they would be married. Then when it comes to the ceremony, the traditional part, which most people would consider to be the religious wedding, essentially all they would need to do after that would have a reception. If they wanted to go through all the motions of going down the aisle, etc., especially with our current understanding, if they wanted to have a traditional church marriage, they could go ahead and do that, but essentially all they need to do really after that would be just to have a wedding reception when a suitable time comes, which could be quite some time away the way things are moving at the current period. So let me summarise what I've said. I think marriage, when we talk about a state marriage and a religious marriage, I think they can be combined together. If you can legally have a registry wedding, then I'm pretty sure that you could have a small religious wedding. It may not be what a couple had desired or dreamed about, but either they would wait or they would marry in that fashion, and then what they could do is just have a wedding reception at a later date, 6 months, 8 months, however long it is down the road after they're married. I think that's an option that's open to people if they feel that they want to marry in this time period when there is essentially a lockdown. I hope that answers the question.
Would you say that the essential part of the religious wedding is saying the vows, and you could do that at a registry wedding when you say vows to each other to exchange that, to confirm that covenant, really?
So, Sister Emma said, is the essential part of a religious wedding the vows that you exchange one with another? I think at a registry wedding you do exchange vows, but those vows are non-religious. Yeah. Often many couples today actually write or say their own vows on top of the traditional vows that the minister will guide them through. But if someone were to do a register wedding, I think they could be afforded the opportunity to say their own personal vows to one another. I'm not sure if people often do that at the registrar's office, but they could also have someone there from the church, either in the office or maybe just outside in the foyer, that or in a private setting in a home, they could do the religious ceremony part there at that time on that day. And if we were to consider the essential parts of religious wedding is the vows that you give one to another that you commit to, and also the prayer that's offered to you, that is the essence of a religious marriage. The rest of it is just basically tradition or ceremony, and without critiquing the rights and wrongs of all of those ceremonies and the need to do them, then I think essentially that the essence of a religious marriage could be handled at the same time as a registry wedding. If the state allows some kind of marriage, a state marriage, you could fit into that the religious component of the marriage as well, I think. Can a priest marry a Levite when they join the kingdom? I think yes. I don't see any reasons why that can't be the case, why a priest cannot marry a Levite.